Welcome to No Straight Lines, the podcast that gets real about performance, resilience, and what it really takes to grow, lead, and thrive. This isn't just about the wins, it's about the work, the grit, the setbacks, and the strength to keep going when things go wrong. I'm Lawrence Windmill, your host, an entrepreneur, and someone who's learned resilience through facing some of life's toughest moments. Each week I sit down with leaders from the world of business, sport, entertainment and the community to unpack the moments that shaped them, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Because success, it's never a straight line. This is No Straight Lines, stories of the unbreakable. Lee Ramsay, welcome to No Straight Lines.
Thank you.
Stories of the unbreakable.
Thank you.
So, the military beginnings.
Yes.
Give us an insight. It must have been remarkable.
It was. So sort of earliest memories really growing up with my father obviously being in the RAF. The first real recognisable country I can remember living in was Sardinia.
Nice.
I managed to sort of live there for 3 years as a very young child, but obviously living within the Mediterranean was particularly nice. It was a great idea, a great opportunity really to sort of just live in the sunshine, and something that a lot of people crave more than most. So yeah, it was Sardinia was the earliest memory.
Was there a British base in Sardinia at the time?
Yeah, it was a British American base. It was a place called Decimomano, and it was primarily American with a small British forces team on there. And my dad sort of worked in Eramed, so it was kind of a central base to most places in Europe to be able to fly to. So, yeah, 3 years was a lovely time.
How old are you then?
So I would have been around about 3 or 4 years old.
But you can still remember?
I can kind of remember going to like what would have been infant school, and a lot of it is kind of photographic as well, isn't it? So your memories are steeped off photographs of, my mum is still of that mindset to keep lots and lots of photographs of years gone by. The real recognisable, and I suppose as I was a little bit older, I was 10 years older, I lived in Holland. I lived outside a town called Brunssum, which is not far from Maastricht, which is quite recognised. The courts of human rights laws and so forth.
I was just going to raise that.
So people sort of recognise that area. We were stationed near a place called Avcent, which was kind of an international. It was a NATO base effectively. So my school, which was out of this world, was filled with nationalities from every part of.
It was an international school, a military international school.
Yeah, every part of the world. So it was heavily influenced by sport. I remember even back then, I'm sort of a little bit older than that now, but getting escalators to my classroom, it was very modern.
Is it difficult? Growing up, I'm fascinated. I'm really interested in history, the military and everything else. And it's very pertinent today with everything that's going on in the world, isn't it? But as a child growing up, what were the challenges for you? Was it difficult to sort of build friendships, relationships, because you're constantly moving down?
Yeah, so
moving around rather.
It was. It's a real test of character early on, I believe. Every 2 to 3 years we would move. I've been to at least 10 primary schools. I went to 2 secondary schools, so it was kind of everywhere that you went, you had to start all over again.
Yes.
It was very, very rare that you were posted to somewhere where you knew somebody. Obviously, my father, as he sort of became more decorated and obviously climbed through the ranks within the military, his position became more desirable in lots of different places. So that meant that we had to follow.
So how many different places did you live in as a child in the military?
At least 10.
Wow.
A lot sort of scattered across the UK, places like Brize Norton and Bedfordshire, Holton. We lived in obviously Innsworth within Cheltenham and Gloucester. So again, it was tough. There was no easy parts to it.
And siblings?
No, I'm
You're the only one.
child.
Okay, so how did Mum cope with this? It's part of way of life, I suppose.
Yeah, the military is a wonderful a wonderful organisation and really family orientated, but yeah, challenging. You know, my mum and I obviously spent many times watching my dad go to war.
Well, I want to pick up on that point because when we spoke prior to today, you mentioned that quite a lot. Were you actually in one of those, not a war zone, but were you in a country where wars were active at that particular moment in time, or were you based here in the UK while Dad went off to war?
Well, I lived through the IRA terrorist period, so it was very normal for us to have to check our car for bombs. You know, we had like obviously the little magnifying glass, and so we had to check the car before we drove away. So I lived through that period. I obviously lived through a heightened time on British military camps where you know, terrorist organisations were rife. So you know, regularly seeing people armed with guns very early on was there. And of course then obviously, you know, alluded to obviously my own father going to war, the Falklands War when I was very, very young.
Was he there?
Yeah, he was, yeah. Ironically, it's probably one of the war conflicts that he probably speaks about least, if I'm honest. And I think that's probably based on maybe the rank that he was at the time and maybe what he saw.
How did he get down there? Was he flown down there, or did he go out on one of those ships?
Yeah, he went out on a ship and was camped there for quite a while.
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, I raise it because I've got a genuine interest in military history, and I remember that campaign. I remember looking at it and seeing the TV footage, and the brutality of war came home to me as a young person, shocked in fact when I saw, because you think that you sort of, I don't know, the glorification of war, but when you see ships such as Sheffield being hit and destroyed, and the Sir Galahad being bombed, and those helicopters going in to try and airlift people out. I think Simon Weston was one of those personalities that we can relate to. I remember as a young person being shocked, thinking, my God, you know, this is no sort of plain sailing expedition to the South Atlantic where everybody comes home safe. This is brutal reality, and the ship counts continue to lose ships.
Yeah. You know, that's the harsh side of having a father in the military.
You must have been really, 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 you and your mum, for your own dad's safety, petrified. How did you deal with that?
My mum is an incredible character. My mum is a huge support and an influence, largely shapes a lot of the characters I have, although from both mother and father. You know, my mum's character, I think, more of most. But we did, you know, we just pulled together, you know, and particularly, you know, in the field you work in, Lawrence, in media, I could never escape the fact that my father was in Iraq or in Afghanistan. You know, it was on news 24/7. And, you know, at the time where I became, you know, a young teenager, an older teenager, we had, you know, 24-hour news at that point, you know, so it was always there. And I always think back to the phone calls that we used to have, and, you know, technology's moved on since then, but you know, the crackly lines of talking to my father on a delay, and you could hear people tapping in to listen to the conversations, you know, and it was harsh. I'll always have a memory of standing at the doorstep with my mum. My dad was going off early hours of the morning in full camouflage, you know, the desert camouflage stuff that was going on during the Gulf Wars, and actually looked at my mum and thought, that might be the last time I see my dad.
Wow. You
know, that is...
that puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a challenging part. It's you know, it defines your character, because you can allow that to eat you up, or you can try and deal with it the best way you can.
You said defining character. When I first met you, I was talking to you about this podcast and invited you to potentially come along as a guest, and I'm glad you have, because one of the subjects we were talking about was resilience.
Yeah.
And that resilience, very often I use it in business terms, in business speak, in terms of how business leaders need to have that or can learn it in terms of bouncing back from setbacks, adversity, etc. But in terms of that, what you and your mum went through, and your dad in terms of fronting up and doing his duty in those conflicts, for me, that's resilience at a different level.
Yeah.
Because that's resilience that you're dealing with life or death situations, as opposed to whether or not you break even on a P&L account or whatever else.
Yeah.
So and I know you're in business now, we'll talk about that shortly, but that must have prepared you, as you said, it must have started to prepare your character for life, for those challenges that come further down the line, which clearly,
I definitely believe
different
that.
types of challenges.
The whole journey from outside looking in, wow, Lee, you've lived in Sardinia, you've lived in Holland. Yeah, ever so grateful. I've lived in some incredible countries, but the opportunity that we're given because of that was the fact that I watched my dad go to war 4 or 5 times. Listen to my dad, having to write a last letter, things that people don't realise that goes on. Watching the news, knowing that my dad is a couple of miles away from where that conflict is, where people are publicising the fact that, people are dropping bombs 23 hours a day. And so, yeah, that's hard. And obviously then having to, support your mum,
Yes.
She supports me, but I know I supported her. So, and just go about daily life. So, yeah, you're right. It does define your character. The resilience is never lost. You never forget that. You never forget it.
Well, it's coming across loud and clear. And again, and I say this, and I mean this genuinely, because we see lots of images of people not coming back from war. I remember during the Afghanistan-Iraq conflict, seeing those aeroplanes landing down at Oxfordshire and the coffins coming off draped in Union Jacks. The great news is for you as a family, your dad made it through, he came back, and he's now retired, and we're not going to talk about Dad today any further, but I'm delighted to say he was recognised for his efforts, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. So he was given an MBE.
Fantastic.
He'll always say that the St John's medal means more because it's based upon his profession, but that didn't involve going to the palace. So that was an incredibly remarkable period, and obviously with the late Queen Elizabeth II as well, to be able to honour that day was incredible. So yeah,
memories.
Fair play, Dad. You did all right.
Memories. Okay. So back to you. When you sort of got to a certain age where you realised that you have to sort of find a way in life, I think Gloucestershire was the hub for that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Now this is interesting. I'll use the word ventilation.
Yeah.
And Gloucester College or Gloucester University. What was it?
I trained to be a gas engineer. So that was my first sort of academic journey beyond school, and I always had kind of a desire to work with hands and so forth, and heating and ventilation. So yeah, progressed into the gas engineering world. That's how I started.
Why though? Why? I know you said that you wanted to work with your hands, but no aspirations to follow in your father's footsteps?
Yeah, no, there was for a period of time. I kind of sort of homed in on the sort of flight engineering type model, but kind of got to the point where I recognised I've moved an awful lot. And the thought of being kind of in Holton for my training and then maybe 4 years in Germany just felt like it wasn't for me at that point. So yeah, kind of encouragement from family and various other people within my family, tradespeople of some sort, and that sort of age-old expression, you can't go wrong with a trade lad, that type of mentality. So
Gloucester College of Technology is where it started.
Yeah.
But on a lighter note, and I do like this, it wasn't just about the college, was it? Because you were a pretty good footballer during your time. Yeah. Trials at Southampton, have I got that right?
Yeah, so had trials with Southampton. I had a decent career with Gloucester City after that. So again, much like the theme of the conversation, the resilience, failure.
Kicked out of Southampton. They built a nice little footballing.
Yeah, to be told by a Premier League side that maybe it isn't quite right. It doesn't mean it's the end. Obviously, I got to play a decent standard of football for a number of years for Gloucester City, and to represent the city you live in is kind of a great achievement. And definitely memories I look back fondly on. Definitely.
So what was your position?
I played in goal. Yeah.
You were the goalkeeper?
I was a goalkeeper. Yeah. Last line of defence. It was. Which again, it's a lonely position. It's a position that obviously you make one mistake and and the whole world, you know, sort of falls upon you. The striker misses 9-10 chances, scores 1 goal, he's the hero. So yeah, definitely brilliant.
What fascinates me with goalkeepers, particularly in our climate during the cold weather, how do you keep warm when all the action is at the other end of the field?
You just keep moving. One of the things I used to do particularly was kind of constantly slap your thighs, you know, so, you know, to kind of create that warm energy. But always to be moving. And look, if you're proactive as a goalkeeper, you'll be told that you are absolutely part of the game. You know, you're the eyes and the ears, and you're sort of dictating where people position themselves. You know, you're very much part, because you're focusing on, you know, your back four, obviously the midfield, you know, where counter presses and presses might be.
So the adrenaline, the communication, the direction. I get it. Okay.
And also as well, you're very close to the crowd. So
you get a lot of that.
Yeah, you do get a bit of that. Yeah.
So, well, that's interesting as well, because I always think that there are parallels between sort of sport and business. And if you were managing the team, if you like, from the from the rear, I suppose, you know, that must have helped you in terms of your sort of mental transition into when you've run your own business, in terms of how you build teams of people, how you manage people.
Being part of sport is just fundamentally underlines the importance for me. You know, being part of a team. I wasn't a tennis player. You know, I was part of a group of other 10 individuals, and working together as a team. Yeah, you know, probably until this point, Lawrence, I've never really appreciated that. You know, when you look at that particular piece of my journey through my young adulthood, how important that was. You know. I was fairly young as well, so I was kind of thrown into the deep end at quite a young age. I played men's football from about the age of 14, so to share dressing rooms with, you know, adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s. My
God.
It's quite an eye-opener.
Intimidating?
Yeah, very.
Steep learning curve?
Yeah, very. The smell comes back of the deep heat and stuff.
Choice of vocabulary?
Yes, very much so. And, you know, people smoking in dressing rooms and stuff, it doesn't happen anymore. But you get to hear and learn a lot more. So, yeah, to be part of that team and that character building, I'm sure has benefited me as I moved into business.
Yeah, absolutely. Must have been some strong characters and personalities in that dressing room. Well, okay, next big question for you, really, which is interesting. So you travel all around the world with the military. You set up base in Gloucester, but then you decide to come across the what I call the Severn Bridge, the old Severn Bridge, and put down roots in Wales. So what dragged you across the border then?
So it started really with my business partners now, Steve and Andrea, who I've worked with now for 17 years. They became a client of mine through a previous job role, and we just clicked. And at the time, Steve and Andrea were franchise owners of a Dyno Rod. That they'd had it for a couple of years prior to me meeting them, and they were going through a transition to start a plumbing company.
Okay.
And at that point, obviously, my relationship grew with Steve and Andrea. And I'll always remember this particular poignant moment. It was a day it snowed, and you didn't really see a lot of snow in Gloucestershire for whatever reason. So I remember phoning through to Steve and saying, unfortunately, I can't get to you today. There's sort of snow on the ground. Same sort of came back. Same for us, don't worry. And he asked me the question, so what will you do? And I said, well, I'll do a bit of a stock take. I'll just make sure my paperwork's in order. How about yourself? He said, I'm starting a plumbing company. I went, I used to be a plumber. And that's where it began. So
for those of us who don't understand your world, when I think of Dyno Rod, it's one of those franchises with the big pink or orange vans, isn't it?
Yes, the orange vans. Yeah.
I thought Dyno Rod was plumbing, and it is it?
So Dyno Rod is owned by British Gas. So
I didn't know that.
British Gas bought the franchise off a gentleman called Jim Zockel. I'm sure that's correct. He was the kind of the entrepreneurial part of why it started. He was an AMPAM pilot. He brought back some innovative technology from the United States, helped a nightclub in London, and lo and behold, the franchise grew.
Wow.
British Gas bought that for a considerable amount of money. Fair play to Jim. And they took on the franchise to basically complement the home services market.
Right. So this is big drainage problems underground.
Yeah.
So you told him you were going to... So he wanted, I suppose, that's drainage underground. He wanted then to create his own plumbing business.
Yes.
You were qualified through Gloucester College.
Yeah.
I got that right, didn't I?
Yeah, correct.
So you you jumped on board with his offer as an equity partner or as an employee within the business?
So as an employee to start with, you know, we sort of toyed with the idea at the time. My then fiance, my now wife Lindsay, and we had 2 young children at that time, Lily and Lacey. It was a big decision, you know. It was kind of, look, Lee, we want you to come and work. I felt and recognised the opportunity. You know, I really bought into Steve and Andrea as people, but it meant moving from. I always say I had to move countries again.
Yes, you did.
In a roundabout way. And that was obviously a big thing for my young family at that point. But it felt right, and the plumbing side of it obviously played upon my previous experiences. So yeah, we took the gamble, and thankfully it paid off.
So you moved to Wales, and you were then part of this new plumbing business, or were you bought into some sort of franchise model?
I was brought in as a development manager to work with Steve and Andrea to create a plumbing company. So British Gas were giving us a lot more work, which meant new employees, different types of vehicles. And Steve and Andrea lent on my experience as an engineer. You know, at this stage, Lawrence, I was still only 26.
Yeah.
You know, some of the people then I was geared up with employing, you know, were much older than myself, you know. But that experience of learning to grow a business with Steve and Andrea through development allowed me to understand how to deal with people. It was my first insight into P&L, you know, human resources, the whole world of business that you don't really see as an engineer.
No.
Is kind of exposed to you at that level of management. So that was kind of how we started, and we worked together, and we created that plumbing company to accompany the franchise model of the drainage business running alongside.
And does that company still exist?
Yeah, so we sold that company.
Well done.
By that time that we sold that company, I had become a partner in the business. So during that period of the first 5 years starting the plumbing company, I then became kind of a bit more visible with other people in different businesses, and I was offered a couple of different positions at that point by quite large corporate companies.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that my head had been swayed, but my heart was very much rooted within Steve and Andrea's business. So to cut a long story short, you know, there was to-ins and fro-ins, and I lent on Steve and Andrea for the first time to say to them, I've not come to you to ask you for more money. I know that the opportunity of money that I'm being offered now it can't be replicated here. I know that. I was too close to their business. I understood the financial model. But I came to them because for the first time in my life, my heart was telling me to stay. And Steve and Andrea were a great support during that period. Prior to sort of the conversations that had been going on, they were super supportive. You know, they really helped us relocate in Wales. They were there as friends when we didn't really have people that we knew at that time. So it became more than just people that I worked for.
Yeah, I guess big loyalty coming through here.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, very much
And
so.
Clearly a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot these days about employer-employee relationships and what price is loyalty. But
it's huge.
Based on what you're saying, that's shown through.
Yeah, trust is a huge thing, and they were there for me in times where, you know, my family, you know, Lindsay and the girls needed a support network around them, you know, and they were there for us.
So you decided to stay?
I did. And on the morning of my wedding, which is kind of all about you in the morning until your bride turns up, and then it slowly becomes about the bride, you know, which is right, absolutely. I'm not sort of belittling that. It is the bride's day. But that morning where I'd met, you know, my close friends and family and went to my local pub, Steve and Andrea gave me a present. I opened that present and it was a plaque that said Development Director. And I said, I don't quite know what this means. And they said, we want you to be part of our business. Go and get married, have a brilliant day, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
Wow.
And that opportunity to become part of the business as an equity stakeholder was an opportunity that I didn't have to pay for.
Good job you stayed.
It was.
Okay, so the relationship is strong, and there's lots coming out here because, again, from a business point of view, running a business, you mentioned words like P&L, building teams, loyalty, all of those things, all essential parts of making a successful business, but no business is successful without the right people in that organization.
Correct.
You've clearly found the right dynamics with yourself, Steve and Andrea.
Correct.
So, I understand the franchise model. I understand the business you created and then sold, and now you're talking about a completely different entity, are you, with this equity stake?
Yeah, so no, at that point I became, so the business itself was called SJ Environmental. It traded as a Dyno Rod franchise. Okay. So I was given equity across the entire business. All disciplines, the plumbing, the drains, the drainage repair, everything kind of led to that limited company, and that was the company that I was given the equity in.
What in terms of timelines, where are we now? What year was this?
So I was 31 at that point. So just got married. I'd been with Lindsay for 22 years now at this time, but Lindsay and I had been together since we were 20. Obviously moved here at 26, 2 young children.
So what are we talking about, 2016, 2014?
Yeah, so a little bit earlier than that. Yeah, a little bit earlier than that. And then that opportunity obviously to become part of the business structure at that point was obviously a big challenge for Steve and Andrea as well. You know, they'd already built a business that effectively they were inviting somebody else into, and I remember sitting with them when we got to the point of looking at shareholders agreements and all kinds of things and structures and how that worked. And obviously, not nervousness, but, you know, in terms of Steve and Andrea, how do they protect themselves first and foremost? And I remember saying to them, write into the agreement if you want, if I leave within 10 years, I get nothing. I walk away with nothing.
Okay, so a lot of people would say that's naivety. A lot of people would say it's reckless, and other definitions and interpretation would be loyalty.
And also knowing where the journey was, where you were going. You know, I felt strong and passionate about what we were able to deliver.
Well, again, they're qualities to be admired, and you've got good judgment, because we'll see further down the line you're still working with those guys today. But other stuff has happened in your life during that time. So COVID came and hit us all, didn't it?
Yes.
But in the year of, I think it was 2020, COVID, something else happened. I think Storm Dennis happened as well.
Yeah, so
Storm Dennis. Talk, because you told me this, you talk about that being a very difficult period in your life. You were a key worker?
Yes.
Long periods of time on your own?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess that pushes your resilience. I guess that tests you as a person in terms of coping with those pressures, being out there on your own, lonely in the field, dealing with emergencies and working through COVID. How did you deal with that?
I remember, obviously COVID, obviously such a vivid memory for so many, and I'm sure you talk to many people that have experienced that will highlight that as a particular poignant moment in life, you know, for everybody. But it was kind of that first time of going home and listening to the Prime Minister at that time tell everyone to stay at home, to think, oh my God, how am I going to earn money? You know, how do we continue to earn money? And, you know, you go into that kind of protection mode. How do I protect my family? You know, how do I keep the roof over our head? And I remember sitting down at my kitchen table, and at that point, you know, we'll talk about it in a bit, but Shawmark had also started and was complementing the works we were doing within the franchise. I remember sitting at my kitchen table and thinking, you know what, I've worked too bloody hard for this to stop, you know, to stop me. You know, even with a pandemic that had kind of spiraled out of control at that point. And it was kind of at that point going, well, a lot of what we do can't stop, you know. Humanitarian, environmental, you know, it can't possibly stop because we all have to go home. So I remember ringing round customers at that time and speaking to them and you know, slowly but surely, regardless of what the governments were saying at that point, because key worker statusship hadn't really become a thing. It was just like, you know, they'd made it recognised that things like, you know, retail and you know, particularly food and hospitals and so forth. But actually, what about industry? How does industry continue to keep going? So I remember spending hours on end just trawling through address books and phone numbers, and first and foremost, you know, are you okay? Are you all right? But, you know, but what happens now? You know, do we keep going? And look, gratefully, we pulled out work to continue us going. You know?
And you were allowed to keep going with it?
Yeah, we were, you know, because we kind of fell under this environmental umbrella, you know. So if everyone's kind of at home and they have a sanitation issue, what's worse?
Now this is interesting because Schuermark, which is your business, which was born out of a pub conversation, I think it was.
Yes, it was, yeah.
But we then, and you can explain to us in a moment what Schuermark does, but in 2020, I guess, was that the defining moment where this really started to happen for you, where this adversity that had affected everybody suddenly became an opportunity for you to do something with that
It did,
with
because we had, you know, at this point, obviously, the Dyno Rod branding and the business that we had built was really recognised throughout South Wales, and we'd built up a great repertoire of businesses and people that we worked for. But the franchise model allowed me to get out and about. You know, it gave me that kind of exclusivity to continue trading, and that was a particular time where Schuermark really developed. Because at that point where, you know, other businesses for whatever reasons, you know, through that through illness or through, you know, financial restraints, whatever it may be, you know, they didn't come to work. You know, people were furloughing people, I think was the expression. You know, people took that opportunity to do things differently. We didn't.
So you got Dyno Rod, you got Schuermark. Again, for people tuning into this podcast, what's the difference? What does Schuermark do that Dyno Rod doesn't do?
So Schuermark kind of goes beyond the drain. So the drain is very much where, you know, the relationship with Dyno Rod came to an end. Schuermark became more around environmental compliance, understanding the legislation, understanding what the need was, understanding biodiversity, you know, understanding the impact that sites can have on neighbouring areas, and fundamentally self-taught in terms of understanding how that legislation looks. And I felt that the business model based upon something that somebody had to do was far more powerful than something that somebody should do. You know, so in terms of drainage, it's very reactive, it blocks, and you know, there are some stats out there that says a household drain will block every 7 years. By working with commercial entities through legislation could mean that I visit that site 4 times a year.
Right.
That felt like much more of a grounding, a foundation to build a business on, and that's where Schuermark really started to learn.
So when did, again, because as a customer, me listening, if I'm dealing with you as somebody supplying services, and me understanding the services that you're providing, what was the timeline in terms of Dyno Rod for you anyway disappearing and Schuermark becoming, if you like, this sole operating company?
Sold Dyno Rod last year. So in February last year, the franchise was sold after, you know, kind of a good year of negotiating with various business people that wanted to sort of buy the franchise. So that became kind of the cut-off point for Steve and Andrea primarily. By that point, I'd kind of already left a couple of years earlier. So I kind of resigned from my position as Dyno Rod, not as my equity stake and shareholding agreement, but in my role, my day-to-day role. I was still there to support the business, of course, and it's hard to shake off something that you've been associated with for 15 years. So, but that came the defining moment, really. For me, when I left, it was all about me taking responsibility on my own at that point to really see whether we could grow this new business to support us. And we did, yeah.
So well done. Bring us up to speed. You've got involved in this franchise model. You've had 2 business sales, 2 deals.
Yeah.
You've created a new company, Schuermark. And the great news for you, of course, back to this loyalty, the old team of you, Steve and Andrea, remain together.
Yes.
And your business development strategies seem to be going from strength to strength.
Yeah.
But before you tell me any more, I've got to touch upon this because big news story at the time that you nearly choked on your cornflakes. In 2023, just sum up for us in a minute. You had other responsibilities back in the world of football.
I did.
And all of a sudden, your football club was all over the national news.
It was. So yeah, at the time, my son Leo had ended up in Pontypridd Football Academy, and I became associated to the football club through him primarily. Loved the interest, loved the community spirit, loved, you know, a lot of the people within it, and kind of found myself kind of ended up in a role of academy chairman.
Right.
Came in at a time to support and obviously see what my business influences could do to try and help that business. Lo and behold, obviously, like lots of sporting clubs, you know, they're difficult, they're hard to run.
So what happened?
So we ended up on Sky Sports News.
While you were having breakfast?
Yes.
And you didn't know anything about this?
No, I remember sitting down and, you know, breaking bulletin, and the Sky Sports News presenter came on and said, breaking news from Wales, Pontypridd United Football Club. And I was like, what?
That's me.
Did I just hear that right? You know, they are looking at 141 point deduction. And at that point, Lawrence, you're correct. I spat my cornflakes out. I could not believe it. And at that point, my phone rang off the hook. Family members, people from the club. And of course, it was all based around kind of an administrative error. But at that time, it was so public. You know, it ended up in news in ESPN in America. It was everywhere, and it was a really challenging time, obviously, to just assure everybody.
So, as Academy Director, again, just sum it up for us. How did you get through it?
First of all, was about protecting everybody within it. You know, to make sure that everyone doesn't kind of jump ship at that point. You know, that everyone gets the clarity that they need. You know, headlines are headlines. You know, they're there for reasons. You know, I'm old enough and smart.
So how did
enough.
you get through it?
By working with the coaches, by working with the people within the club, pulling together as a team.
So did the club survive?
Yes, it did.
It did. Okay.
It did survive.
Well, I'm fascinated because I think there's a common link running through all of this. As difficult as it was, you grew up as a child, growing up in the military, used to dealing with situations, moving all of the time, changing all of the time, building resilience, not knowing if your dad was going to come home or whatever, which is, my God, I can't even comprehend that. But your success in business it's been inspirational, actually, because we talk about businesses and some fail and some work. In your instance, you've done 2 deals, you've sold businesses, you found the right partners, the equity partners, you've got great dynamics going on, you're still in business with these guys.
Yes.
And I met you through Schumacher, so I didn't know any of the history or anything else. So what you've created today is a brilliant brand and testimony, I think, to your story. You've had some tough times, and you've come through that, you've demonstrated that resilience, and you're running what is clearly a brilliant business. But there's more than this as well. You're all about team, you're all about giving back, you're all about, you know, supporting kids as you did at Pontypridd, etc., etc. So, in a sentence, again, what's the biggest success for you?
The biggest success really is being able to create and run businesses that support lots of families.
Okay, but in your timeline, is there, in addition to that, has there been any, in your opinion, what is the biggest standout moment, that defining moment that has just shaped you for what you are today? Was it that COVID period where you seized that opportunity?
Yeah, there was COVID. There was a particular time where my dad was diagnosed with cancer as well.
Oh my God!
Which was a challenging part, and kind of brings everything home. You know, COVID was, you know, the resilience of not giving up and not allowing outside noise to stop you doing what you're doing. But, you know, family members, health-wise, it puts things into perspective. It really does. And everybody at some point has that hurdle in their life. Yeah. Unfortunately, none of us can shy away from that.
Well, you're very calmly, you're very measured, you've got great judgment because you've made the right decisions clearly throughout your life to date. And long may that continue. Bit of fun now, bit of quick fire for you.
Go on.
Favourite book?
Favourite book, The Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Oh, I like that. Was that written by Donald Trump?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't, but maybe he's read it. Yeah, maybe he's read it. So it's a book by Mark.
I like that. Best gig?
Best gig I've been to. The best gig I'm looking forward to is Oasis in a couple of weeks. I didn't think I'd have the
Can I get your tickets? Because I tried to get them and I couldn't get them.
It took me hours and hours of resilience to get them tickets. So no, unfortunately not.
Wow. I look forward to you telling me the story about Oasis. You and 65,000 other people crammed into that stadium because I couldn't get the tickets. What's the daily non-negotiable?
Family. Family must always come first. We my business partners, we work in a fast-paced life. We work in a predominantly fast-paced business. But family has to come first, Lawrence.
And what's next?
What's next? We continue with what we're doing with Shawmark. It's doing some amazing things at the moment with the University of South Wales, all to do with flooding, which we spoke about back in Storm Dennis in 2020. So now being able to have a platform like Shawmark, which is a successful business in its own right, but allows us the time to work within a university, to look at local area, and how can we impact that and do good. You talk about one of the most amazing things. That is it.
That is it. Lee Ramsay, director, I think, of Shawmark.
Yes.
Former footballer, brilliant community ambassador, a man with huge resilience. Thank you for joining us on No Straight Lines. Stories of the Unbreakable. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.